Jack, many of us have heard Scott's story, but a lot of us are parents or grandparents and are really intrigued about the other side of the story. And in many ways, I'm really grateful to both you and Scott for tonight. But I'm grateful to you, too, because it's pretty vulnerable on your part to hear that, and you know some of the questions and how pointed they are. So yeah. I really want to thank you for being willing to do this. But I want to start with maybe share a little bit what life was like for you growing up. Did it resemble Scott's life? Did you get into the same kind of trouble? Or their connections? What was life like for you?
Well, it was a little different. I was born and raised about 15, 20 miles outside of Detroit. Lived in a median income area, blue collar as we call it. Pretty much everybody worked for the automotive industry up there. The only difference was my dad was a cop. My dad was a cop for 30 years. He became a juvenile cop when I was in high school. And he busted all the kids I went to school with. So that was a little bit different. My mom was a homemaker. I have 3 sisters. The youngest one is 10 years older than me. So I was basically raised as an only child. Unfortunately, my father was an alcoholic. His brother was an alcoholic. His dad was an alcoholic. And my mom's dad was an alcoholic. Fortunately, it skipped my sisters and myself. None of us have an addiction problem. But in our immediate families, each one of us has at least one kid who has a problem. So I guess it's genes that kind of bounce around. It was tough for me with my dad being an alcoholic. I wasn't home much. Fortunately, I grew up in the same house with the same friends for many, many years, and we just grew up together, and that's where I spent most of my time, was outside of the house. Later on in life, my oldest sister, believe it or not, was 22 years older than I am. I was kind of an oops baby, if you kind of get that drift. She kind of took me in and took me on vacations and weekend trips and kind of kept me on the straight and narrow, if you will, which I'm extremely happy that she did that. What my dad would do, he would take me on these extravagant things once a year to think he was making up for it. You know, we'd go to the Indianapolis 500 by train. We'd go hunting, and he didn't hunt, but we'd go hunting. Or fishing once in a while. You know, he'd take me instead of going with his buds. So it was very tough for that. Then as I went on and grew up with all my friends, everybody started getting married, young ages. I did the same thing. And babies having babies, babies getting married. None of it worked for any of us. We all got divorced. And that's pretty much where it starts now.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever think you'd be doing an event like this here at a church?
No. No. I'm a private person. I don't like talking about my life or my family's life to anyone other than, you know, maybe family members or very close personal friends. For a good example, I hate Facebook. Because when somebody gets on Facebook and says, okay, I just got up, I just got out of the shower, I just ate toast, they tell their whole life. That's not me. And as you know, and as Scott said, I'm not a religious person. Yes, I've been in churches, Scott, wherever you are.
Yeah, he exaggerated that.
Yeah, a little bit. My first wife and my second wife were both raised Catholic. All my friends when I grew up were Catholic. I was not. There was really not a religion in my house. So just to clarify that, that's what it was, and I never really took to a religion, and that's where it's at.
Which to me, I thank you all the more for showing up today. I'm not into Facebook either, by the way. I'm going to start something called Footbook and make billions.
There you go. Okay, I'm with you.
But you and Scott's mom divorced when Scott was pretty young.
About 6.
I've heard him say, you know, he sort of felt like nobody explained it to him, and he sort of wished they would have. And I know he talks about how hard it was to have 2 sets of parents, different rules, that sort of thing. As you look back, do you think you might have handled it differently in any way?
Yeah, probably so. You know, again, you're a kid. You got married as a kid, you're divorced, not as a kid, but maybe 25, 26. You don't know what the hell to do. You don't know. So you do the best you can. When we got divorced, Scott's mom took Scott and they moved to Chicago. I really had no control over the situation at that point. There was not much I could do. I went there on, I think it was every 3 weeks. I'd take the trip to Chicago. This went on for a year to see Scott. And that's the best I could do. Child support, I paid directly to her. I didn't even go through friend of the court. Did that on a weekly or monthly basis, whatever it was.
So it felt like, I'm doing what I can do. I'm
Yeah.
being responsible,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. You guys had a pretty good, other than getting divorced, the relationship remained pretty solid. Was that a positive or a negative, you see?
I would say it was a positive. This is something you probably won't hear many times. When we got divorced, we used the same lawyer. It was the lawyer she worked for. He charged us $100. Then we split everything down the middle and went our ways. And as we were raising Scott, we wouldn't argue. We really got along okay. When Scott got into trouble, she'd call me, and it just worked easier, I think, for everyone concerned that you can get along with each other and not have your sibling see the problems that are going on through a bad marriage.
Yeah, that relates to the next question, because he was in trouble a lot, and his mom would call you regularly, say, Scott did this, Scott did that. How'd you handle that? Did you just like, what can I do, or what did you try to do, or?
It was frustrating. We would talk probably, I don't know, a couple times a week when Scott was getting in trouble in school. Basically, school was the problem. We just tried our best to do things. We went to school. She went to school. She would sit in the back of a classroom and write down his homework and everything he was supposed to be doing. And when he got home, he was to do that. She went that far. Then we started having him go to see counselors. I can't even tell you how many. We're talking about it tonight. And Scott thinks we went through 9 different counselors. And we finally hit upon one that Scott feels helped him. I sure as hell didn't see it. But he feels that it helped him.
How did all that affect your home life? I mean, you've established a new home. You have a wife, a family you're dealing with. How did that affect you, that Scott's in trouble and feeling like you constantly have to be on top of that and stuff?
Well, I'd get those phone calls again twice a week, and it was hard because when I get the phone calls, I would get ticked off. I'm tired of hearing it. And he's spending. And I'm not taking anything and putting anything on Scott's mom, but he's spending 95% of his time with her and living under her rules. And she would call me and say, he didn't do this, or he did that, or he did that. It was very frustrating. I'd get mad, I'd take it out on my wife. At that time, we had a new family coming up, so I'm trying to concentrate on this too to make this right. And it was hard. It was hard. Mary Ann and Scott, at that point, did not have a real good relationship. He was very hard to get close to. And she didn't have the sensitivity, nor she probably didn't have to have the sensitivity that I had at that point with what was going on. It was very hard.
So eventually Mom gets tired of all this and says he's got to come live with you. And technically, I guess he's old enough to be on his own, technically. But you said I'll take him in. What were you thinking? Were you thinking I can change Scott, or what were you hoping would happen?
Well, my wife and I had a conversation. Obviously, I wasn't going to bring him into my house without her okay also. No, I didn't think I could change him. But here's what I hoped for. I hoped I could get him to get at least a high school diploma and get a job, then start to get on with his life. That's what I was hoping for. Did I know I could do it? No, I didn't know. Because up to this point, anything and everything that was done with him or for him, it just didn't work. Right. You got to know, Scott had a great life. He had it. if he would have taken it right, it could have been fantastic for him. I've got notes here. I'm not even going to look at them, but I asked Scott just this last meeting we had what some of his better memories were as a child. And he said, well, I remember my baseball cards. He had a bunch of baseball cards. He loved baseball cards. I remember sitting there and playing with them and all that. And I said, well, what else? He said, that's about it. That's about all. I said, come on. As a kid, he's been to Europe. He's been on these great vacations, cruises, whatever. He's done a lot. And it's not a solid memory for him. I didn't get that. Then I look back at my childhood. I had a great childhood. Even though I had an alcoholic father, I can't even tell you all the great memories I got out of my childhood. And he gives me one. That took me to the quick. That really, really hurt. And it told me that as a parent, I didn't know what the hell was going on in his life. I had no idea. Even though he wasn't living with me, I should have known a whole lot more than that. I figured he had friends. He was out playing baseball with his friends just like I did. I assumed he was doing what I did. And he was not. As he told you, he was home till 6 o'clock at night by himself because his mom was going to law school and on with all that stuff. But I should have been, as a parent, much more aware of what was going on.
What intrigues me about Scott's story in some ways is just what you said, though, Jack. His background isn't typically what you find in prison, so to speak. No. His story is a very different one, which intrigues you. And then that whole sense, like you say, I think as parents, we think one thing's going on, but it's taken a totally different way sometimes by kids. And at least from my heart, I'm saying, man, Lord, give us discernment and sensitivity there. I hear you.
Yep.
Well, I mean, after you take Scott in the second time, and he sort of alluded to this, or give him a second chance, I should say. He stole the monies out of the accounts. I don't remember all. I've read it, and it always amazes me. But that had to fry your britches, so to speak. What were you thinking at that point when he had started emptying those accounts? And what did you do that you can share in a G-rated manner among us church people?
I'll be G-rated.
Okay.
When I first found out it was done, I didn't know that it was Scott. To be quite honest with you, I didn't think it would be him. I didn't think he'd be stealing from me and my wife, my mom and dad, the whole 9 yards. So Scott knew that I knew. So he split.
Right.
Then when I found out it was Scott and I came home looking for him, here's where I'll be polite, I would have killed him. I would have wrung his neck.
Now he's told me you would have literally killed him.
I would have been the one going to prison. That is how hot I was. I get hot right now. You can probably hear it in my voice, just thinking about it. And it's not the fact that he just stole from me. He stole from my mother and father who were gone. They had died out of their estate account, who thought the world of him. That really got me going. He stole some jewelry from my wife. He stole my dad's gun that he talks about. That was my dad's service revolver. He stole that from me. That was hard. That was really, really hard. To think that your son would do this to you. What Scott didn't know is when I went to the police to report this, to get the money back, I had to file charges against my son. Believe me, I had no problem. None whatsoever. I filed the charges. One of the great fortunate things of the whole mess is that, and I can't even tell you when, it may be a year later, maybe 2 years later, I get a call from the Ferndale Police Department, which is where I was living. And they said, Mr. Mason, we have a revolver here that is registered in your name. Because I called the police department, said it was stolen, and I had it registered before that. And they said it was used in a crime, but we have it here now. Would you like to come and pick it up? That was great. The fact that I got that back was super. I kind of lost even track where I am right now. But yeah, I was going to kill him.
So that was a tough point, low point, breaking point in many ways for you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Big time. Big time. After everything we went through all these years before this,
right.
This was the cap. Straw, as you will, that broke the camel's back.
Now, going a slightly different direction from that, it's during that period of time, too, that he's wrestling with committing suicide, though. You know, he shared a little of those stories. Less for God, but for God's grace, perhaps even would have taken his life. Even as tough as things were, I mean, you got to see a little, did you ever see any warning signs of that? Or maybe looking back as a parent, things some of us should be looking for when our kids are struggling that would clue us in?
I never seen it.
Okay.
Scott was an expert liar. He was building this, let's say, brick house, and then all of a sudden, a big hurricane come and it fell down on him, and that's when he was trying to commit suicide. I didn't see it. I don't know, when you got somebody that's as good as lying as he really was, maybe I was naive, maybe I gave him too much leeway and really didn't work with him as close as I could, but and I'm not taking this as saying this is not my fault, but at the same time, I'm raising 2 new daughters, trying to raise another family, hoping that this guy is finally going to get on the right track, and then I can concentrate on getting this right, and hopefully he's going in that direction.
Yeah. It's got to be a tough balance. I think probably sometimes as parents we beat ourselves up in a negative way when there's not much that can be done, and yet the other side is perhaps sometimes we should have been looking for more. Man, we need
You have always
God's
got to
grace.
be looking for more, Tim.
Okay.
I'm telling you right now, I didn't do this, but I'll tell you today, you got to be in your kids' computers. You got to know what they're doing in these computers. You got to check their emails. You have to do it. Legally, I don't know what the legal ramifications are of all this, but you have to do it. When they go out to school, you got to get in their room. You got to start looking everywhere. You got to see if they got any pot in there, or if they got a bottle of vodka sitting somewhere or something. You really have to get involved in your kid's life to the nth degree. You just have to. And if you're divorced, it's going to be harder. But you, as divorced parents, you have to talk about that together, and it's got to be done.
Well, it's only a few short years after that here's Scott, 21, and he's heading to considered probably one of the toughest prisons that we have in our penal system. How can you describe how you felt about that? I mean, it was like, this is the end? What were you thinking?
Wow, that's tough. I don't think any of us know what prison is. Here's what you get about prison. TV and what you hear people talk about, radio and things of that nature. When you see what you've seen on TV, it's the worst of the worst. You think that I have a son who's 20 or 21 years old. He's a towhead, which is a blonde. He's not a big kid. He's good looking. He's going to prison. There's not a damn thing that I can do to protect him in any way, shape, or form. Nothing.
So that ran through your head like, what can I'm powerless.
I'm powerless. There's nothing I can do.
Yeah. I mean, and then he goes back and back. I mean, did you ever think he was going to learn his lesson? Did you ever think this is the last time, or?
No. I really didn't. The first time he got out, I knew he was going to wind up going back.
Okay.
His attitude hadn't changed. It's probably gotten worse. He probably learned more inside at that point to make life easier for him on the outside. And his attitude hadn't changed, and I think he was headed back. There was no question about it. As far as him going back again and again, who knew? Who knew?
Here's you and Scott have talked a little bit about these questions, so it's not totally blindsiding you, but this is the one that struck me as the hardest. I kept trying to think how to change it here, because
that's all right.
but I couldn't figure out how to do it. But after Scott's second prison sentence, and he talked a little bit about that, you say, well, I'll help you out, but you can't live here. I'll get you a place down the road here, and you guys go into the parole officer, and he suggests that that's one of the places he shouldn't live. And I think Scott, looking back on that a little bit, saying like, what in the world were you thinking, Dad? How am I going to get away with this? What were you thinking?
Well, let me give you my thought of this, and I'm not saying it's right. When Scott got out, he wasn't coming to live with me. There was no way. He wasn't going to live with his mom. It wasn't going to happen. For him to get out, he had to have a place to go to. So I did. I lied to the parole officer, said he's going to live with me, and I put him up in this other place. I did not know it was the #1 place not to be in. But the reason I picked this place, I drove by it before. A sign outside said weekly rates. Behind it was a Kmart. Across the street was a Meijer. Next door was a Farmer Jack. So my thought was, if I can put him in this place, he can work a night crew somewhere, get a job, because they're always hiring these people in these places. He can walk to work, start making some money, hopefully get his life on the right track. Now, as far as him saying people laying outside shooting heroin, well, I didn't see any of that. But who knows, maybe they were. I found out later when I talked to the parole officer, this is where we don't want you to put him, #1. I said, oh, shit, pardon my French. Now what do I do? But I didn't know what else to do at that point. I didn't have any more. I already paid for a month and some food, and I actually bought him some cleaning chemicals to clean the place up a little bit. And I didn't have any more money to do anything else. And those people weren't going to give me my money back. Yeah. So I guess I rolled the dice and hoped it was good.
And probably a classic. It's so easy to be on different pages. One person thinks they're doing the right thing, the other person misses it altogether, and vice versa. But that had to be a tough time. Oh, well. And it didn't take him long to get him back in prison after that
But
either.
You know what, Tim? I could have put him up in the Ritz-Carlton. He'd have been back in prison again. Yeah. So
at that point, no attitude had changed that in any way would have...
It didn't matter. It wasn't the best place to put him. I understand that. But he would have been back anyhow.
Right. Right. Well, once he's back in prison this last time, several years into his sentence, Scott really did, in his heart, begin to change. When you began to talk with him, were you noticing anything different?
Scott called me. We talked quite a bit. You can talk when you're in prison. He can call me. I can't call him, obviously, but he can call me. And of course, they record the phone calls and all that type of stuff. But he called me and he says, Dad, I'm reborn. I found Jesus. I said, Scott, everybody in that prison has found Jesus and is reborn. Everybody. Why am I going to believe you? And he just kept saying it, And I said, it's another Scott scam is all it was. You go before the parole board. Yeah, I found Jesus. I'm reborn. It's good. When I get out, it'll all make my life better. I just thought it was a big scam. But he started, when he'd call me, he would continue with this. He had his grandfather send him some money so he could buy, I don't know if it was the Bible or some other type of book that he could...
Yeah, I think it was some Christian books for his study library.
Exactly, and he was studying. He was building this Christian library, and he was truly studying. Now, as Scott told you, he never finished anything. He never took anything from point A to point B. Scott was, I want that, I'm going to be that actor, but I ain't going to work for it, so I'm going to fake it. Or I'm going to be that cop, but I'm not going to school to do it. I'm going to fake it. So he was actually pulling this thing through, and he was really, really working it. So I got to feel very good that something did happen to him. Okay. And if it did happen to him, and it was going to keep him out of trouble, hey, I was all for it. It didn't make me a believer, But I was all for it. I was 100% behind him at that point.
Right. And over time, it did seem to be like, you know, Scott's still Scott, but he's changing too. Something's going on
There
here.
was no question about it. He was definitely changing.
Yeah, this isn't in our questions, but I remember at the wedding, Marlene and I were sitting with you and Marion at the little reception briefly, and we had to leave early, and basically you said to me, you know, good luck with your relationship with Scott. I remember that very clearly. And I chuckled at the time, but man, I thank the Lord for it every day. And I can tell you about our first time we met too, and I never thought I'd see him again, but God works in unusual kinds of ways for sure. So Scott finally comes home for the last time. What was that like? I mean, did you sense this probably is it?
You know, you don't know for sure. I think when Scott came home after the third time that he went in, you hope, you know, he's your son. You hope he learned something finally. I think what was over his head, that if he would have went back the fourth time, it would have been major time. Major. It would have been 20 years plus, without question.
Yeah.
Also the fact that he was reborn, found Jesus. That, for him, worked. It was those two things together, I think, is what kept him out. And then as you see what he's done with it now is just unbelievably fantastic. I'm so proud of him now.
And that relates, you know, he has accomplished a lot in the 9 years or so he's been home. One of those, the journeyman electrician, means a lot to Scott. He shares that so vulnerably. You know, I finally succeeded at something. How did you respond to that as a dad?
Well, as he said, it was the only time that not the only time, he did the Christian thing in prison, but when he got out, actually, if you want to call it schoolwork or whatever, it's the only time that he ever worked hard from point A to point B and did everything in between, and he succeeded. It was probably the most proud moment of my life of him.
Wow.
That he finally did something like that. And he did it, and we talked constantly on it, and I know he worked as hard as he's ever worked on anything. Mm-hmm. It was fantastic.
And then not long after that, he basically says, you know, hey, I can do this now, but I don't really want to do this. I'm going to go into Christian ministry full time, or whatever words we Christian people use. And I know his mom thought he was a nutcase. What did you think when he said that? Did you try to talk him out of it?
No, I didn't try to talk him out of it. My first question to Scott was, okay, Scott, how are you going to feed your family? And how are you going to make money? He said, well, I'll work when I can and do the ministry stuff, you know, in between. I said, okay, well, I knew that he was, through our time talking and everything about this, I knew that this is what he wanted to do. He had taken it to the nth degree. This was it. This was everything that he was focusing on. So I said, look, Scott, if this is what you want to do and you can feed your family in some form or fashion, go for it. I'll be 100% behind you.
Okay.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I was the only one that thought he wasn't crazy.
I think he's told me you were the only one that thought he wasn't crazy. Over the past few years, we're really getting toward the end of some of these questions. I mean, he's done some pretty remarkable things, from some of the things he's been able to do in Los Angeles, the speaking opportunities he's had. I know he always chuckles when he gets to speak maybe at a college and share with people, thinking of, you know, where he came from in terms of his approach to that. Has a book coming out, a poster, he often takes that with him. Their kids always wanting him to sign the poster. He gets Facebooked all the time. And yet, in some ways, he's become better known, or his story that gets out there makes him somewhat successful. And I think this is a tough question too. Has somewhat been at the expense of you guys. I mean, you're in the story and it's not always in a wonderful light, and it takes you to painful places again as a parent to hear him share, or if you would read his book. How do you respond to that, very honestly?
Well, it's true. I mean, there's no fallacies about it. It's all true. I think it's probably cleansing for him, and me coming up here is somewhat cleansing for me. Scott and I have, how do you say it? He took his 20s in prison.
Right.
That's a very memorable time for all of us, I believe. He also took his 20s away from me. And because of that, we probably don't have the father-son relationship that a lot of people have. It's not what I would like it to be. Now, we've worked on it over the years. He does live, 3 hours away from us, so we don't see each other enough, but we do talk 3 or 4 times a week on the phone. But it's very, very hard. I mean, I never had it with my dad. I didn't have the relationship, as I said. I would love to be able to go hunting, go fishing, go away for the weekend, do guy stuff. We never did that. Give me the question again. Let me.
Well, basically, some of his success in some ways, because it's his story and how God's changed him, but it involves his past. I think in some ways Scott feels like it's somewhat been at the expense of you guys,
Yeah, the whole thing has been at the expense of a lot of people, not just my wife and I, his mom, his stepdad, his aunts, a whole bunch of other people. It is what it is. It is what it was. It's done. It's past. It's old. It's something that I hope in somebody that gets into this type of a situation can say, okay, it's done. It's past. It's over. Let's move forward. And that's what you have to do. And that's what we've done. That's what my wife has done. That's what I've done. And I think Scott knows that.
I hope I'm not asking too risky. Do you feel like forgiveness is complete in this whole process?
No, not yet.
Still feel like there's places to go, but it's possible?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Scott did a lot. And I don't care what he did to other people. I shouldn't say it that way, but I don't care. Not that I don't care. He really, really hurt my family. I had to go to my sisters and tell them what Scott had done to me and them, so he didn't scam them. That was embarrassing as all get out. It was bad. What he did was bad. But we're over 95% of it.
Yep. And that blesses my heart more than you know. And whether you care or not, I'm praying that becomes complete. Whatever that forgiveness looks like becomes absolutely
I think
complete.
it will. I don't know how long it'll take, and we will talk more because of this. That will help that get better, without question.
Which I think is really cool, the vulnerability of both of you. Well, I said at the beginning, some of us are probably here struggling too. Maybe